They say the child was left by the wind. But what if she was sent by God to test the heart of a woman who had given him everything but never expected to be called Mama? That's exactly what happened one cold morning in Redemption Ridge, when a mysterious woman rode into town, placed a newborn on the chapel steps, and vanished into the dust. Sister Margaret, who had spent 15 quiet years in service to orphans, and the Lord opened the door and found not just a baby, but a calling she never saw coming. The child didn't cry. She simply looked up as if she already knew where she belonged. This story isn't just about a baby, it's about a miracle that challenged faith, duty, and the definition of family itself. If you're ready to hear the whole truth, hit that subscribe button and comment one below to let me know you're listening. Because what happened next will stay with you. Redemption Ridge, winter of 1874. They say the wind in Redemption Ridge can skin a man's face clean off if he stands too long in it. That morning it came down from the north like a ghost rider, cold, sharp, and howling with a hunger. Sister Margaret was tending the stove inside the chapel when she heard hooves on frozen dirt. Few folks traveled this far into the blufflands unless they had a reason or a secret. A lone woman dismounted in front of the mission house, her face wrapped in a weathered scarf, eyes hollow from the road. In her arms, she carried a bundle wrapped in nothing but a torn saddle blanket frayed at the edges and soaked from the storm. Without a word, she laid the bundle on the chapel steps, rang the old bell, and turned to leave. By the time Sister Margaret opened the door, the woman was already fading into the snow, swallowed by the wild. No name, no explanation. Just that tiny bundle barely breathing, crying not from fear, but as if calling for someone who hadn't yet arrived. The child couldn't have been more than a week old. Pale cheeks, clenched fists, and eyes like desert storm clouds, too deep, too knowing for someone so new. Sister Margaret didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She cradled the infant to her chest, feeling her heartbeat shift in rhythm as if something ancient inside her had just been awakened. They named her Grace, not for any family lineage or Bible passage, but because no other word made sense. In a place where justice came on horseback and mercy was often 6 feet under, this child felt like something sacred, out of place, out of time, and yet exactly where she was meant to be. The other children at the mission orphans of gunfights, fever, and frontier misfortune gathered in silence around the fire that night, staring at the newcomer. She didn't cry. She didn't fuss. She just stared back, calm as still water, as if she already knew every one of their names. Later that night, while the wind screamed through the cracks in the mission walls, Sister Margaret sat by the fire, Grace in her arms, rocking slowly, whispering prayers that hadn't passed her lips in years. The flame flickered, casting long shadows against the altar, and for the first time in a long while, the chapel felt full. Not of bodies, but of hope. No one knew who the woman was. No one came looking. And maybe that was for the best. Because deep in her bones, Sister Margaret knew one thing. That child hadn't been abandoned. She'd been delivered. Before we go any further, if this story is already tugging at your heart, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment the number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Because the road ahead for Sister Margaret and baby Grace only gets harder and holier. You won't want to miss what happens next. It didn't take long for folks around Redemption Ridge to start whispering. The baby didn't cry much, only once that first day, and not since. Not when the wind rattled the windows, not when coyotes howled down from Split Rock Ridge. Not even when the church bell rang for Old Man Jarvis's funeral. To some it was eerie, to others holy. But to Sister Margaret, it was something else entirely. A kind of peace she hadn't felt in 15 years of tending orphans and burying heartbreak beneath rough desert crosses. They called her Grace. Not because it sounded sweet, but because it felt true. No last name, no trail of papers, just a child who stared at you like she saw something you didn't even know was broken. The townsfolk brought supplies without being asked. Old Miss Harper stitched together a proper blanket from worn-out dresses. Hank Tolley, who never gave a damn about church before, showed up with goat's milk and wouldn't say why. Even Sheriff Klein tipped his hat and said, "She's quiet, but she's watching. That's the kind you keep close." Sister Margaret didn't speak much about it, but every evening she'd light 2 candles, one for the woman who brought grace and one for the Lord, who she believed had sent her. She'd sit near the hearth, cradling that baby, in the same shawl she'd once wrapped around her own grief, and hum low hymns that had long since faded from memory. Songs her mama used to sing on nights when the wind bent trees like they were begging. Grace responded to no one else the way she did to Margaret. When others tried to hold her, she'd go stiff, her little fists trembling. But in Margaret's arms, she melted like wax eyes, fluttering shut as if she'd found the only home she needed. It was like the child knew she'd been claimed not by blood, but by something deeper. And it wasn't just Margaret who noticed. Little Thomas, age 6, told the preacher's wife, "Miss Grace, don't cry, 'cause Sister Margaret's heart is too loud. Baby just listens." The older children, most with more scars than memories, grew protective of Grace, in a way they never had with each other. She was their softness, their symbol, that maybe, just maybe, not everything was cursed out here. But in the back of Margaret's mind, a chill lingered. Out in the West, nothing good lasted long. Word had spread about a baby who didn't cry and a nun who loved her like kin. And in a town where deeds didn't mean much without a gun to back 'em, Margaret knew it was only a matter of time before someone showed up claiming rights to what her soul had already accepted as hers. She just didn't know if she'd be ready to let go. If this story has you wondering what you'd do in Sister Margaret's shoes, holding a child you were never meant to keep but can't imagine letting go, then go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Tell me if you believe that sometimes love chooses us before we even know we're ready. Because what comes next will test everything she thought she believed. Redemption Ridge. Early spring, 1874. The thaw came late that year. Snow melted slow, revealing mud rot and secrets long buried in the red earth. And with it came a letter, delivered by a dust-covered rider from Carson Springs. Clean paper, fancy seal, smelled like perfume and East Coast entitlement. Sister Margaret read it once, then again. Her hands didn't shake, but something inside her did. A couple from Boston, wealthy, well-connected, had heard about the child. They were coming west, backed by legal documents and church endorsements. Said they were ready to raise Grace in a proper Christian home. Proper, Margaret thought. As if this little chapel with its cracked bell and rough floorboards wasn't sacred enough. As if love needed wallpaper and china to be real. That night she sat beneath the wooden crucifix, Grace asleep in her arms. The chapel was quiet save for the ticking of the old clock and the occasional pop of burning pine. The child's breath rose and fell against her chest, warm and steady. Margaret looked up at the crossed lips pressed tight. "Lord," she whispered, "I've never asked for much. Just enough to serve, enough to keep the cold off their bones. But this," her voice cracked, "this one's different. She didn't just come to me. She became part of me. You know that." There were rules, of course. Vows, expectations. A sister of the cloth wasn't meant to raise children like a mother. She was meant to serve them all equally without attachment. That's what the Mother Superior would say. That's what the papers in the envelope insisted. But out here in the lawless edge of the world, rules bent like saplings in a prairie wind. And Margaret had seen too many good things swallowed by bad men quoting scripture. Could she leave the order, cast off the habit, the veil, the vows? Could she trade her life of prayer and penance for diapers and lullabies? Part of her recoiled. The other part, something deep maternal. Fierce wanted to rise, to claw, to defend. The next morning, she didn't join morning prayers. Instead, she rode out alone before dawn. Grace bundled tight against her chest and followed the river until it forked toward Dust Hollow. There she stood atop a bluff as the sun cracked the horizon and made her decision. If they came for Grace, they wouldn't find a weak, obedient nun. They'd find a woman with the desert in her blood and fire in her eyes. She might not have law on her side. She might not have money or influence, or even a roof without holes in it. But she had something stronger: conviction, and a child who had never cried because she already knew who her mother was. Redemption Ridge, 1 week later, 1874. They came in style lace gloves, polished boots, and a baby carriage that looked like it belonged in a Boston ballroom. Not the mud-soaked streets of Redemption Ridge. The woman wore a hat with silk ribbons that caught the wind like sails. Her husband had the look of a banker. Broad coat, clean beard, and the kind of handshake that came with contracts. Their wagon creaked through the main street, flanked by curious eyes and cautious silence. Nobody said a word, but everyone watched. Inside the chapel, Sister Margaret stood near the altar, Grace pressed against her chest. The baby was fussing, nothing loud, just little breaths of unease, like she sensed what was coming. Sheriff Klein arrived first. His boots echoed on the floorboards as he took off his hat. "They got papers," he said quietly. Eyes filled with the kind of sympathy that didn't change a damn thing. Legal ones. From the bishop out east. From the court. Margaret nodded, though her jaw clenched tight. "So did Pontius Pilate," she muttered. The doors creaked open, and in they came. The woman, her name was Linda, smiled too brightly, her voice high and sweet, like molasses hiding something bitter. "Is this her?" "Oh, she's perfect." Grace recoiled as Linda reached out her little arms, flailing, face scrunching. But when Margaret whispered a hymn and held her close, the baby quieted instantly. Linda's smile faltered. The husband, David, cleared his throat. "We've come a long way. The church believes this child deserves stability. Civilization, a proper upbringing, civilization," Margaret said softly, not looking at him. "Is that what you call it? Taking a child from the only arms she's ever trusted?" Klein stepped between them. "There'll be no fighting here," he said firmly. "We're holding a council tomorrow. Town hall. Folks will hear both sides." "Both sides." David raised a brow. "This isn't about feelings. It's about law." But Redemption Ridge wasn't a town that always cared for law. Out here, people remembered who fed their children, who buried their dead, who prayed with them when the preacher was too drunk to stand. And everyone remembered Sister Margaret, the woman who gave bread without asking names, who pulled bullet shards from a ranch hand's leg with the same tenderness she now gave Grace. That night, the chapel stayed lit till well past midnight. Margaret knelt by the altar, hands trembling as she wrote out her words, her argument. Not in the legal tongue of the East, but in the plain-spoken truth of the West. She wasn't just fighting for Grace. She was fighting for the right to be the family no one expected, but the one God, fate, or the wind itself had chosen. Tomorrow the town would listen. And Margaret would speak not as a nun, not as a servant of the church, but as a mother. Redemption Ridge Town Hall, 1874. The town hall hadn't been that full since the flood of '66, when the river rose up and nearly took the saloon with it. Lanterns swung from rafters, casting warm, flickering light across weathered faces. Ranchers, miners, widows, and children, all packed shoulder to shoulder. At the front stood Sheriff Klein, arms folded. Next to him, the Eastern couple, Linda and David, polished and upright, like they'd stepped out of a Sears catalog. And then there was Sister Margaret, still in her black habit worn from years of dust and prayer, holding Grace the way a gunslinger holds his last bullet, with fierce, quiet purpose. "We're here to hear truth," Klein began. "Not fancy talk or paper stamps. Just truth." David stepped forward first, His voice was smooth, practiced. This child deserves opportunity, education, safety. We've been vetted by the state. We can provide her a future beyond this. Frontier. Linda nodded, pulling out photographs of a painted nursery and a silver rattle. She'll have everything a child could want. Margaret said nothing. She just looked down at Grace, who nestled closer into her chest, fingers grasping her wooden cross like she knew it was all she had. Then from the back, a small voice rose. She already has everything. It was little Maria, one of the older orphans. She has love. She has us. Others began to murmur. Then Tom Hobbs, grizzled prospector, barely bathed in a month, stood up and cleared his throat. I seen that nun work till her hands bled. She patched my leg when the doc was out cold. She's the only ma most of these kids have ever known. Miss Harper, the seamstress, added softly. That baby doesn't cry when she's held by Margaret. That's not something you can buy. Then came old preacher Jonas, hobbling to the front with his cane. You folks came all this way to save a child. Noble, sure enough. But sometimes God don't send a baby to be rescued. Sometimes he sends her to rescue someone else. Silence. Sheriff Klein looked to Margaret. You got anything to say? Sister. She stepped forward, voice low but steady. I made vows. I meant them. But then she came. And something in me changed. Maybe I'm breaking rules. Maybe I'm bending them. But I'd rather answer to God than to men who've never heard this child laugh. The room held its breath. Klein rubbed his jaw. I'll say this. Out here, family ain't always made of blood. Sometimes it's made of who shows up when it's dark cold and nobody else will. He turned to Linda and David. Y'all may have papers, but out here, we go by what's right. David's shoulders tensed. Linda's eyes welled, but she nodded. She's already chosen. And so it was settled, not with a gavel, but with quiet consensus sealed by lantern light and grace. Sister Margaret stayed. Grace stayed. And the town, dusty and wild, bore witness to a new kind of family built not on names, but on love that wouldn't let go. In the windswept lands of the Wild West, where law was loose and survival came hard, this story reminds us that family is not always defined by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and divine calling. Sister Margaret's journey teaches that true motherhood is not found in biology or legality, but in the quiet, relentless choice to care, to protect, and to never walk away. Her love for Grace was not convenient or expected. It was holy. The townspeople saw that, and perhaps so did God. This tale speaks to the heart of Christ's message that the greatest among us are not those with power or title, but those who serve with compassion. Let the little children come to me, Jesus once said. And in Grace we see not just a child received, but a community transformed. In choosing love over tradition, Sister Margaret honored not just the child, but the very heart of God. And if this story moved something in you, if it stirred questions about faith, love, or what truly makes a family, then don't stop here. Click over to the next video, because what happens after this will challenge everything you thought you knew about sacrifice, redemption, and the kind of love only heaven can give. I'll see you there.